Sirens aren't supposed to blare outside the manicured lawns of Pelican Roost Retirement Village. Federal agents don't usually drag 70-year-old men in orthopedics out of bingo night. But Arthur and Linda aren't your average seniors. They're my parents, and they bought their golden years by stealing my entire life. Greg, the mortgage loan officer, had a nervous habit of clicking his Mont Blanc pen. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound echoed in his glass-walled cubicle, a stark contrast to the low, soothing hum of the bank's central air conditioning. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept staring at his monitor, scrolling up and down, as if hoping the numbers on the screen would miraculously rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. "Rachel," he finally said. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Is there a possibility someone else has been using your social security number?" I laughed. It was a short, breathy sound, devoid of actual humor. "No, Greg, I'm 26. I've never even had a credit card with a limit over $1,000. I pay my rent on time. My student loans are in deferment. We're just looking at a starter condo." Greg turned the monitor around. I leaned in. The screen was a wall of red text and aggressive, bolded numbers. My eyes scanned the columns, my brain struggling to process the data. Credit score, 412. "That can't be right," I whispered. "There are 14 active accounts here," Greg said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic murmur that made my stomach churn. 2 auto loans. One for a 2021 Range Rover, another for a Mercedes E-Class, both in default. There's a mortgage on a timeshare in Cabo San Lucas. 7 premium credit cards, all maxed out. Personal loans totaling roughly $140,000. Most of these have been sent to collections. The cold sweat started at the base of my neck. It didn't rush over me. It seeped into my skin, damp and heavy. I stared at the screen. The addresses listed under my name weren't mine. A luxury apartment complex in Scottsdale, Arizona. A commercial P.O. box in Las Vegas. "I don't own a Range Rover," I said, my voice sounding incredibly far away. "I drive a 2012 Honda Civic. The passenger door doesn't even open from the inside." "You need to freeze your credit immediately," Greg said, suddenly shifting from loan officer to crisis counselor. "You are a victim of severe identity theft. Whoever did this has been building a profile under your name for at least 4 years. They started small. A store card here, a gas card there. They paid them off perfectly to build your credit limit. Then, about 18 months ago, they busted out. They took everything they could get their hands on and vanished. 4 years. I left the bank in a daze. The afternoon sun in Seattle was weak, filtering through a layer of gray clouds, but it felt blinding. I sat in my Civic for 45 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. I pulled out the thick stack of printed credit reports Greg had handed me, page after page of financial ruin. I traced the timeline. 4 years ago, I was 22, just graduating from college. My parents, Arthur and Linda Gallagher, had thrown me a graduation dinner at a steakhouse they absolutely couldn't afford. Arthur had ordered a $200 bottle of Cabernet, laughing loudly, tipping the waiter with a crisp $100 bill. Linda had worn a new pearl necklace. They had always been grifters, though they preferred the term entrepreneurs. Growing up, our financial life was a roller coaster of terrifying drops and exhilarating short-lived highs. One year, Arthur was flipping real estate, and we lived in a sprawling colonial house with a pool. The next year, the market crashed, his LLCs dissolved, and we were suddenly renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner, ignoring the relentless ringing of the landline because it was always collections. But they had never crossed the line into actual crime. At least, that's what I told myself. They just played fast and loose with the rules. They leveraged debt. They robbed Peter to pay Paul. I looked closer at the credit report. Address 3, 4922 E. Camelback Road, Scottsdale, AZ. My breath hitched. I remembered that address. 2 years ago, Arthur had asked me to forward some business mail to a P.O. box in Scottsdale. He claimed he was setting up a shell company for tax purposes and needed a clean address. Account 7. Platinum Amex. Authorized user. A. Gallagher. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. I dropped the papers on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't get the key into the ignition. It wasn't a faceless hacker in Eastern Europe. It wasn't a stolen wallet. It was the people who taught me how to ride a bicycle. It was the man who walked me down the aisle at my imaginary weddings when I was 6. It was the woman who held my hair back when I had the flu. They hadn't just ruined my credit. They had harvested my identity like a crop they had planted 26 years ago. When my mother asked for my social security number, my senior year of college, to set up a post-grad mutual fund, she wasn't securing my future. She was stealing it. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hey kiddo," Arthur's recorded voice boomed, cheerful and slick. "You've reached Art. Leave a message and let's make a deal." I didn't leave a message. I put the car in drive and merged onto the interstate. They were currently living in a leased townhouse in Bellevue. I was going to look them in the eye and watch them lie to me. The townhouse was located in one of those aggressively beige developments that promised luxury living but delivered paper-thin walls and zero parking. I pounded on the front door, the heavy brass knocker bruising the side of my fist. Linda opened the door. She was wearing a silk kimono, holding a half-empty glass of Pinot Grigio. She looked annoyed until she saw my face. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a perfectly rehearsed mask of maternal concern. "Rachel? Sweetie, what are you doing here on a Tuesday? Is everything okay?" I pushed past her without a word. The living room smelled like expensive candles and impending eviction. Arthur was sitting in a leather recliner, watching a golf tournament on a massive flat-screen TV. He paused the game and turned around, flashing a brilliant, orthodontically perfect smile. "There's my girl," he said, slapping his knees. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I threw the 60-page credit report onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Explain this," I said. My voice was eerily calm. It didn't belong to me. Arthur looked at the stack of papers, then up at me. He didn't even blink. He reached out, picked up the first page, and adjusted his reading glasses. Linda hovered in the doorway of the kitchen, her grip tightening on her wine glass. For 30 seconds, the only sound in the room was the muffled commentary from the paused golf game. "I see," Arthur finally said. He set the papers down precisely where they had been. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, adopting the weary posture of a CEO dealing with an insubordinate intern. "Rachel, you don't understand the complexities of corporate finance." "Corporate finance?" I barked, the calm facade shattering instantly. "You bought a Range Rover in my name. You maxed out 7 credit cards. My credit score is 412, Dad. I went to a bank today to get a mortgage, and they looked at me like I was a criminal." Linda rushed forward, her face crumpling into tears. It was an impressive performance. "Oh, Rachel, please don't yell at your father. We were going to pay it all back. We just hit a rough patch. The Phoenix deal fell through, and we needed liquidity." "Liquidity?" I screamed. "You stole my social security number. You forged my signature on loan documents. Do you know what that is? It's a felony. It's identity fraud." Arthur stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but he had a presence that commanded rooms. He used it now, puffing out his chest, trying to intimidate me. "Don't use those words in this house," he snapped. "We raised you, we fed you, we put you through college. Do you have any idea how much it costs to raise a child in this world? We made an investment in you. We just borrowed against our own equity." I stared at him, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of his logic. He truly believed it. He believed I was an asset, a line of credit he had birthed. "You ruined my life," I said, my voice trembling now. "I can't buy a house. I probably can't even rent a new apartment. I have collection agencies looking for me for $140,000. I give you exactly 48 hours. You call every single one of these creditors. You tell them the truth, you assume the debt, or I am walking into a police station and filing a report." "You wouldn't dare," Linda gasped, clutching her pearls. Literally clutching her pearls. "We're your parents. You would send us to prison?" 48 hours, I repeated. I turned on my heel and walked out, slamming the door so hard the frosted glass rattled in its frame. I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat on my couch, refreshing my phone, waiting for the call, waiting for the apology, waiting for Arthur to pull off one last miracle and fix it. Deep down, the frightened 6-year-old inside me still thought her dad could fix anything. On Thursday morning, the 48 hours expired. My phone remained silent. I drove back to Bellevue. I didn't bother knocking this time. I tried the handle. It was locked. I looked through the front window. The living room was empty. I don't mean they had packed a few bags. I mean it was stripped to the bone. The leather recliner was gone. The massive TV was gone. The expensive candles, the rugs, the artwork, all vanished. The only thing left was the indentations in the beige carpet where the furniture used to sit, and a stray wire dangling from the wall outlet. A cold, hollow void opened up in my chest. They hadn't just stolen my identity. They had erased themselves from my life rather than face the consequences. I drove straight to the precinct. Detective Miller was a tired-looking man in his 50s who ate a turkey sandwich while I laid out the evidence. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like an angry hornet. He looked at the credit reports, then at me, then at the reports again. "They're your parents?" he asked, wiping a crumb from his mustache. "Yes." "And you lived with them until you were 18? "Yes." He sighed, pushing the papers back toward me. "Miss Gallagher, I'm going to be straight with you. This is a mess. But from a law enforcement perspective, family identity fraud is incredibly difficult to prosecute. Defense attorneys will argue that you gave them permission. They'll say you authorized the use of your information in exchange for tuition or room and board, and now you're just having a family dispute over the bill." "I didn't give them permission to buy a Range Rover," I protested. "Can you prove that?" Miller asked quietly. "Can you prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that you didn't verbally agree to let your father take out a loan? Because unless you have them on tape admitting to the forgery, it's a he said, she said. Most DAs won't touch this. They'll call it a civil matter." "A civil matter? They stole $140,000. You need to file an FTC identity theft report," Miller instructed, handing me a generic pamphlet from a stack on his desk. "Then you need to contact every single creditor, mail them the FTC report, and dispute the charges. It's going to take years. I'll take down an incident report, but I'm telling you right now, we don't have the resources to hunt down your parents for bad debt." I walked out of the police station with a single sheet of paper and a pamphlet. That was the day the ghosting became permanent. My parents were gone, and they had left me trapped in a financial graveyard of their making. The next 3 years were a special kind of hell. You don't realize how much of your life is tied to a 3-digit number until that number is toxic waste. I had to move out of my Seattle apartment when the landlord decided to sell the building. When I applied for a new place, the background check flagged the evictions and defaulted mortgages. I was rejected from 22 apartments. I ended up moving into a damp, windowless basement studio rented by a guy off Craigslist who didn't check credit, only asking for 3 months' rent in cash up front. I couldn't get a new car when the Civic finally died. I had to take the bus 2 hours each way to my job. I spent my lunch breaks screaming at collection agents, sending certified letters, submitting affidavits of forgery. Some creditors believed me and closed the accounts. Most didn't. The bank that held the auto loan for the Range Rover demanded I produce the car. When I told them I didn't know where it was, they threatened to sue me for the remaining balance. I became a pariah in the financial system. I lived entirely on cash. I lost friends because I couldn't afford to go to dinners, couldn't split vacation rentals, couldn't explain why I was a 29-year-old professional living like a fugitive. The anger didn't fade. It calcified. It hardened into a sharp, dense stone sitting right behind my ribs. I stopped looking for my parents. I assumed they were dead, or in jail, or grifting their way through Mexico. I focused on surviving the wreckage they left behind. 5 years after they vanished, the ghost made a mistake. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a battered thrift store, eating pasta, and scrolling through my emails. By this point, I had managed to claw my credit score back to a fragile 620. I had settled some debts, disputed others off my record, and waited out the statute of limitations on the rest. It was a grueling, exhausting victory. An email popped into my inbox. Sender, Cypress Point Specialty Pharmacy. Subject, prescription refill confirmation for L. Gallagher. I stared at the screen. I hadn't used my old Yahoo email address for anything important in years, but I kept it active just in case. Linda. My mother had a chronic thyroid condition. She took a very specific, expensive medication. I opened the email. Dear Linda, your prescription for Synthroid is ready for pickup or delivery. Please update your billing information on file, as the card ending in 4,491 has been declined. At the bottom of the email was an address, 14200 Pelican Roost Way, Unit 4B, Naples, Florida. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, violent rhythm. They were alive. They were in Florida. And Linda, in her infinite technological incompetence, had somehow linked an old autofill email address to a new pharmacy account. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my laptop and started digging. Cypress Point Estates, located within the Pelican Roost community, was not a standard retirement home. It was an ultra-luxury, gated, 5-5+ resort. The website featured drone footage of championship golf courses, private cabanas by a lagoon-style pool, and a clubhouse that looked like a European palace. The buy-in for a condo was upwards of $800,000, with monthly HOA fees eclipsing my annual salary. How were they affording this? I dug deeper. I paid $30 for an online background check using the Naples address. The names associated with Unit 4B weren't Arthur and Linda Gallagher. They were Arthur and Linda Garrison. They hadn't just stolen my identity. They had fabricated entirely new ones for themselves. They had changed their last name, somehow obtained new paper trails, and bought into a millionaire's playground. The stone behind my ribs cracked open, leaking pure, unadulterated venom. I wasn't just going to dispute a credit charge this time. I was going to burn their house down. I requested 2 weeks of PTO the next morning. I drained my meager savings account, booked a flight to Fort Myers, and rented the cheapest car I could find, a silver Hyundai Elantra that smelled faintly of stale French fries. Naples, Florida is a city built on sunshine and hidden wealth. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of expensive fertilizer. I parked the Hyundai across the street from the massive wrought iron gates of Pelican Roost. A guard booth stood at the entrance, manned by a stern-looking private security guard. I couldn't just drive in. I needed to see them. I needed absolute proof before I took my next step. I spent 2 days doing reconnaissance. I parked at the high-end grocery store just outside the gates. I sat at a Starbucks down the road. I felt like a private investigator, baking in the Florida heat, staring through a pair of cheap binoculars I bought at a sporting goods store. On the third afternoon, I hit pay dirt. A pristine white Lincoln Navigator pulled out of the Pelican Roost gates and turned into the shopping plaza. I slouched down in my driver's seat. The Lincoln parked 3 rows away from me. The driver's side door opened. Arthur stepped out. He looked fantastic. He was tanned, wearing crisp khaki shorts and a pastel pink polo shirt. His hair was completely white now, styled perfectly. He looked like a man without a single care in the world. Linda emerged from the passenger side. She was wearing a matching tennis skirt and visor, carrying a designer tote bag. She was laughing at something Arthur said. They linked arms and walked toward the organic grocery store. I sat in my sweltering rental car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. They were happy. While I was eating ramen in a basement, fighting collection agencies, crying myself to sleep out of sheer panic, they were drinking margaritas at the clubhouse. They had funded their new lives, their new identities, with the ashes of my 20s. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of the car, to run across the asphalt, grab Arthur by the collar of his expensive pink shirt, and scream in his face. I wanted to cause a scene. I wanted the rich retirees of Pelican Roost to see the parasites living among them, but I stopped myself. Confronting them in Seattle had achieved nothing. It had only tipped them off, giving them a head start to run and hide. If I confronted them now, they would simply pack up the Lincoln, liquidate whatever assets they had, and vanish again. Another state. Another fake name. No. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want my money back. I knew that was gone forever. I wanted them in handcuffs. I pulled my phone out and took several high-resolution photos of them walking into the store. Then, I zoomed in on the Lincoln's license plate. Florida tags. I wrote the numbers down on a napkin. I didn't drive back to my cheap motel. I drove to the local library, found a quiet corner in the reference section, and opened my laptop. Detective Miller had been right about one thing. Local police didn't care about a family dispute over debt. But local police weren't the ones I needed. My parents had crossed state lines. They had used the U.S. Postal Service to forward fraudulent documents. They had committed wire fraud to move money. They had assumed false identities to bypass anti-money laundering regulations to buy real estate. This wasn't a local misdemeanor. This was a federal crime. I spent the next 4 days compiling a dossier. I organized the credit reports, the old Bellevue lease agreements, the default notices, the FTC affidavits. I included the emails from the pharmacy, the photos I had just taken, the license plate of the Navigator, and the deed records I pulled for the Pelican Roost condo under the name Garrison. I tied a neat, chronological bow around 5 years of systemic interstate fraud. Then I didn't call the local precinct. I went to the website for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division in Miami. I filled out the tip form, but I knew that would get lost in a sea of internet complaints. I found the phone number for the regional field office. A woman answered on the second ring. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Miami field office. "Hi," I said. My voice was steady. The fear that had dictated my life for half a decade was completely gone. I need to speak to an agent investigating interstate wire fraud and identity theft. I have a complete evidentiary file on 2 individuals currently hiding under assumed identities in Naples, Florida. The stolen funds exceed $200,000. There was a brief pause. "Hold, please. I will connect you to a duty agent." A minute later, a man came on the line. "Special Agent Thomas." "Agent Thomas," I said, looking out the library window at the palm trees, swaying in the breeze. "My name is Rachel Gallagher. I'd like to report a crime." The Miami field office of the FBI doesn't look like it does in the movies. There are no dramatic glass walls with high-tech holograms, no tense music playing in the background. It's housed in a blocky, aggressively ugly concrete building. The waiting area smells like floor wax and stale coffee. Special Agent Thomas walked into the small interview room carrying a manila folder. He was a younger man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a navy suit that looked like it came off a mid-tier department store rack. He had the tired, heavily caffeinated eyes of someone who spent 60 hours a week staring at spreadsheets. He sat down across from me, opened his folder, and set a miniature digital recorder on the table. "Miss Gallagher," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. "I spent the morning reviewing the binder you dropped off. You put together a very thorough timeline." "I had 5 years to work on it," I replied. Thomas nodded. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He didn't give me the pitiful, sad puppy look the local cops always gave me. He just tapped his pen against my stack of documents. "The local police told you this was a civil family dispute," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Yes, they were wrong. Or, more accurately, they were lazy. What your parents did to you is called familial identity theft. And you're right, it's a nightmare to prosecute. But that's not what caught my attention. He pulled out the deed to the Pelican Roost condo. It's the Garrisons. He slid a glossy printout across the table. It was a driver's license photo of my father. He looked tan and smug. The name printed next to his face was Arthur William Garrison. "To buy an $800,000 property in cash, you need clean money," Thomas explained, leaning forward. "To get clean money, you have to move dirty money through a lot of very complicated hoops. We ran the Garrison names. They aren't dead people. They're synthetic identities. Somebody took a real social security number belonging to a child, combined it with a fake date of birth, and spent years building a ghost profile. Your parents purchased these identities. That crosses into federal jurisdiction. wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, aggravated identity theft. A strange cold thrill ran down my arms. So you can arrest them. I can, Thomas said, but federal cases aren't built in a day. We need to subpoena their bank records. We need to trace the wire transfers from the accounts they opened in your name to the offshore accounts they used to scrub the cash, and finally back to Florida. We need to tie Arthur Gallagher to Arthur Garrison on paper, beyond a reasonable doubt. How long? I asked. Months. Maybe a year. Thomas closed the folder. I need you to go back to Seattle. Do not contact them. Do not drive past their gate. Do not leave a flaming bag of dog crap on their porch. If they get spooked and liquidate that condo, they'll rab it to a non-extradition country, and we will never catch them. Do you understand? I understand. Go home, Rachel, he said softly. Let me do my job. I flew back to the gray, relentless drizzle of Seattle. I returned to my basement apartment, my cash envelopes, my budget spreadsheets. The seasons changed. The rain turned to sleet, then back to rain. Waiting for justice is a specific kind of psychological torture. I had surrendered my control. To cope, I did something incredibly toxic. I created a fake Facebook profile under the name Gladys Higgins. I used a stock photo of a golden retriever as my profile picture. I answered the 3 security questions required to join the private Pelican Roost Residents Association group, claiming I was moving into Unit 7C in the spring. They approved my request in 2 hours. For 8 months, I became a digital voyeur in my parents' fraudulent paradise. I watched them live the life they had stolen from me. Linda was a frequent poster. She complained about the temperature of the clubhouse pool. She posted photos of the mediocre shrimp cocktail at the country club dining room. She uploaded albums of Arthur holding up trophies from amateur golf tournaments, smiling his 1,000-watt predatory smile. Artie crushed it on the back nine today. So proud of my hubby, she wrote in March. I was eating canned soup for dinner that night because my heating bill had spiked. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I wanted to comment. I wanted to type. You paid for those golf clubs with my blood. But I remembered Agent Thomas's warning. I closed the laptop and went to sleep in my freezing room. Spring bled into summer. I started to lose hope. I convinced myself the FBI had dropped the case. I assumed Arthur had talked his way out of it, just like he always did. The system protects rich people, even fake rich people. Then came the second Tuesday in June. It was 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. I was sitting at my desk at the logistics company where I worked, staring blankly at a spreadsheet of freight manifests. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A frantic, continuous vibration. I pulled it out. My screen was choked with notifications from the Pelican Roost Facebook group. Gladys. Joanne posted a new video in Pelican Roost Residents Association. Gladys. 14 new comments on Joanne's post. Gladys. Pelican Roost Residents Association is going crazy right now. I opened the app. A woman named Joanne had started a Facebook live stream 10 minutes ago. The caption just read, "Oh my God, what is happening at Cypress Point?" I grabbed my headphones, jammed them into my ears, and clicked the video. The camera was shaky, zoomed in from what looked like a second-story balcony. Joanne was breathing heavily into the microphone. "I don't know if you guys can see this," she whispered, her voice tight with wealthy suburban panic. "But there are federal agents everywhere. They just rammed the gate." The camera panned down. The pristine, manicured lawn of Cypress Point was effectively destroyed. 4 black, unmarked Suburbans were parked directly on the imported Bermuda grass, their tires sinking into the turf. Red and blue lights strobed silently in the bright Florida morning sun. Men and women in tactical vests with FBI stamped in stark yellow letters were moving in a coordinated, terrifying blur. They weren't knocking. I watched as 2 agents took a battering ram to the heavy mahogany front door of Unit 4B. The wood splintered with a sickening crack that registered clearly even on the cheap phone microphone. They flooded inside. I stopped breathing. The office around me, the clatter of keyboards, the hum of the copy machine faded into a distant, muffled static. I was entirely inside the phone screen. Minutes ticked by. Agents started walking out carrying cardboard boxes. They carried out a desktop computer. They carried out Linda's Louis Vuitton luggage. They carried out golf bags. Then Arthur appeared. 2 agents were walking him down the front steps. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. He was wearing silk pajamas and leather slippers. The bluster, the charm, the corporate armor he wore like a second skin, it was completely gone. He looked small. He looked frail. His shoulders were slumped, and he was staring at the ground, shuffling his feet. He didn't look like a master manipulator. He looked like an old man who had finally run out of runway. Linda came next. She was a mess. She had a silk sleep mask pushed up into her messy hair. She was crying hysterically, her knees buckling so badly the female agent escorting her had to practically carry her to the vehicle. She kept trying to hide her face behind her bound hands, terrified of the neighbors she had spent 2 years trying to impress. "Oh my God," Joanne whispered on the live stream. "It's the Garrisons. What on earth did they do?" They shoved Arthur into the back of the first Suburban. They put Linda in the second. The doors slammed shut. Heavy, metallic, final. The vehicles rolled off the lawn, leaving deep, muddy ruts in the perfect grass. They drove past Joanne's balcony and out of the camera's frame. The live stream ended. I sat at my desk. The screen faded to black, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked exhausted. There were dark circles under my eyes. I looked 5 years older than I was. My phone rang. It wasn't a Facebook notification. It was a Miami area code. I answered it. "Hello?" "Rachel," Agent Thomas said. The background noise on his end was chaotic radios, squawking, heavy doors opening and closing. "I assume you haven't seen the news yet, but I wanted to give you the courtesy call." "I saw it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. A neighbor live-streamed it. Thomas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "God bless the internet. We got them, both of them. We executed the warrants at 11 a.m. Eastern. We seized the condo, the vehicles, and froze the offshore accounts. They're being processed right now." "What did you charge them with?" "Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering," Thomas rattled off. "They're looking at 20 years minimum. With the federal sentencing guidelines, at their age, they'll die in prison." A heavy silence stretched between us across the 3,000 miles of fiber optic cable. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. My throat felt thick, completely blocked by a knot of emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. "Don't thank me yet," Thomas said gently. "The hard part starts now. You're going to be subpoenaed. You're going to have to testify against them in open court. The defense attorneys are going to try to tear you apart. They're going to drag your name through the mud." "Let them," I said. "There's nothing left of my name for them to ruin. We'll fly you down for the arraignment next week. Get some rest, Rachel. It's over." He hung up. I took my headphones out and set them on the desk. I looked around the office. Nothing had changed. The copy machine was still humming. The fluorescent lights were still buzzing. My credit score was still crippled. The bank wasn't going to suddenly mail me a mortgage approval. The years I spent eating ramen, hiding from phone calls, and wearing shoes with holes in the soles, those years were gone forever. The FBI couldn't put them in a cardboard box and return them to me. But when I stood up from my desk and walked to the break room to get a glass of water, something felt distinctly different. The sharp, dense stone that had lived behind my ribs for 5 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of my parents' betrayal was gone, dissolved, washed away in the Florida humidity. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs completely. It didn't catch in my throat. It didn't burn. For the first time in 5 years, I existed entirely as myself. I was just Rachel, and nobody else was using my name. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below and let me know how you would have handled this betrayal. Family trauma is complicated, but nobody should have to pay for the sins of their parents. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories about survival and justice. See you in the next one.